Welcome back to the Green Beans Go channel. It's your host, me, and today we are going to answer what looks to be a very simple question, and that question is, what do I bet? I get this question asked a lot in my comments, specifically as it relates to plus EV betting. I think a lot of people join this space, they hear about the promises of plus EV betting, they're hopeful, they're optimistic, and they jump in and maybe they find themselves losing more than they thought, or they find themselves overwhelmed with the number of possibilities about what wagers are available. And so today, my goal is to walk through a very simple outline of how I would approach plus EV betting and how I do approach plus EV betting in order to maximize my returns. Everything you're going to see from this presentation is using a website called ODDSVIEW. If you want to sign up for ODDSVIEW and get access to plus EV and arbitrage lines, you can do so using code GMG. It'll save you 35% off your first month. So let's look at the purpose of this video and why I am making it in the first place. And it is, again, to answer a very common question that I get often. This is from Pix Fantasy. He said, great content, man. Thank you. I'm only a month into arbitrage on 5 main books, and I'm already getting limited with a modest bankroll. I want to take on some more risk with plus EV. Could you do a video on how you choose and determine value on your plus EV picks? I feel like just hitting any greater than 10% plus EV bet I see isn't the best option. And in the past, I have spoken about the fact that I sometimes set a threshold at about 10% plus EV, and I'll bet those. And I think Pix Fantasy is right here. That is not necessarily the best option, and there are some more nuances and caveats that need to be explained in order to maximize. And so I'm glad he brought this to my attention, and the purpose of today's video is to answer just that. So I have created a chart. Now, I need you to understand by the italicized text right here, this is a suggested baseline. There are going to be different talking heads in the industry that shift and adjust these squares on this chart in a way that fits their betting style. But for me, this is what I feel is a comfortable starting place for most bettors. We have 3 different types of bets on this chart. We have main markets, such as money lines, spreads, and totals. We have prop markets, think of player props, rebounds, assists, touchdown scores, things of that nature. And then we have niche markets, your quarter spreads or your game-to-game bets in tennis, things that aren't necessarily normal, but maybe are a little bit different than player props. I have set the threshold here on the left. This is the percentage that I would look for and feel comfortable betting for each of these markets. Props 10%, niche markets 10%, but main markets, which are typically sharper, it's okay to dip down to 5%. Now, there are people in the industry who will say they go down to 2.5% even. Again, it's a case-by-case basis, and you have to do what's best for you. Reliability. This is how likely it is that it's actually truly plus EV. For main markets, if you have an outlier, it's typically going to be very, very reliable. But for props and niche markets, there's going to be some wiggle room in who is sharp, who is not sharp. Is this market actually one you can trust? And then, of course, we have the limit risk. You are less likely to get limited on main markets. You are more likely to get limited on prop and niche markets. So you may be saying, well, why don't I just stick to main markets? 5%, it's a lower threshold, it's more reliable, and there's less limit risk. Why wouldn't I just focus on that? Well, that would be great, but there's going to be less bets available to you. Like I said, this is the sharpest market, and so books are usually more accurate when it comes down to main markets. So overall, yes, that would be great if you could focus on that, but there are less bets to go around. Now, the live plus EV chart looks very similar. Again, ODDSVIEW does provide users with access to live lines. The threshold stays the same for all of these. The reliability stays the same for all of these, but a bonus is that your limiting risk goes down. This is anecdotal, of course, and I'm not saying that if you strictly live bet, you're not going to ever be limited, but books typically do not limit live bettors as fast because it's harder to tell if they're actually getting value or not. Now, if you end up winning all of your bets, that's an easy way for books to tell that you're getting value over them. But regardless, live is a little bit safer in terms of limits compared to pre-match. Great, GMG. Thanks for the chart. I'm on my way to place some bets. Charts are great until they aren't. Charts help get us started. I'm going to look at 4 examples from ODDSVIEW this morning. I'm going to walk through why the chart helps us get our foot in the door, but we need to look at a few other things in order to determine if it's a bet we should actually be making. Now, for all of these bets, you're going to see a suggested wager amount. This is done using ODDSVIEW's betting criteria calculator. This is a tremendous feature. All you do is type in your bankroll and your Kelly criterion otherwise known as your risk tolerance. If you want to play it safe, just stick to the standard 0.25. If you want less risk, knock it down. If you want more risk, knock it up. So all of my examples are for a $1,000 bankroll at a pretty modest 0.25 Kelly criterion. Example 1 deals with CJ McCollum steals. You're going to see that ODDSVIEW is suggesting you to take the over 0.5 at minus 115 on Hard Rock. It's telling us that the fair market value is minus 136, and we should bet approximately $22. Let me be very clear, this is not necessarily a bad bet. This could certainly be the plus EV side of the market. It could certainly be a good bet based on the game script and the matchup. But some questions you need to get in the habit of asking yourself are these two questions down here. What are the comps? In other words, how do the other books look to Hard Rock at minus 115? And does the market agree? Well, in this instance, one thing that sticks out to me is that the market is very slim. There are only 3 other books available, one of which basically matches Hard Rock. The other 2, DraftKings and Fliff, well, are we sure that DraftKings and Fliff are books that we want to comp? I fear that people overbet into unreliable plus EV. This is a common thing that I see across threads on the internet. People saying, I started plus EV and I'm just losing. I'm losing all my bets. What's going on? I thought this was supposed to be a gold mine. I thought this was supposed to be automatic variance. It's just variance. We'll just keep it up. It's just variance. We will overcome this. I think this is an example of something that people may be likely to bet, but maybe don't understand the total picture of what this bet entails. Now, if limits did not exist, I would arb the under on DraftKings and the over on Hard Rock every day of the week and twice on Sunday. And why is that? Because looking at these 4 comps, I cannot comfortably say that the Hard Rock bet is plus EV. There are often times where DraftKings and Fliff are wrong, which means that DraftKings and Fliff are not necessarily sharp. I also think that determining who's sharp in a niche market such as player steals is difficult to do. The only other book available matches Hard Rock. There's just not enough information on this bet to draw the conclusion that Hard Rock at minus 115 is the side with value. So this brings us to our major lesson number 1. The EV percentage only matters relative to the comps. Plus EV depends on value to the market and or value to sharp books. And if a market is limited, such as the CJ McCollum example I just showed you, so is value. Again, you may be able to determine, you may come to the conclusion that this prop right here is the side with value. And how you do that is going to be developed through practice and through comfortability with all of these markets. But for me right now, I look at this and I say hard pass. That is not enough information to make this bet, even though it is being suggested to me. Example number 2 deals with a goal scorer. We see that we should bet the over goals for this gentleman, Mackie Samsklevich, at plus 350. It's saying that the fair market value is plus 295, and we should wager about $10 on this prop. Looking at the market, it seems that, wow, Bet365 is a true market outlier. No other book is even over plus 260. So this looks to be tremendous value. It satisfies what we say our EV chart is on props being 10%. This is 14%. And it looks good to sharps if we want to say that Pinnacle is often fairly sharp, not necessarily on hockey props, but if we give them the benefit of the doubt here, FanDuel, we know they're pretty sharp on props. They're at 250. But I think the sharpness to sharps lessens a little bit when your market is this diverse. When you can see that there is one book that stands out above the rest, it is more than likely going to be plus EV. Now, something I don't use all of the time, but is very helpful to new bettors, is the chart that ODDSVIEW provides. I've gotten used to just being able to visualize this myself, but what this chart does is it shows you where all of these lines not only are currently on the far right, but where they started. So if we look here, this was at 3 a.m. Right here. This is where all the books were at 3 a.m. More of a spread, but as it's gotten to mid-morning, you can see that a lot of them have condensed into this area. Most books have congregated around this plus 250 mark, but there is one that is still refusing to move, and that is Bet365 at plus 350, which tells me we have a clear and obvious plus EV bet here and one that I would be comfortable making. Here's example number 3, and this is a screenshot I took from a live bet this morning. And again, if we look at this, we are being suggested to bet this tennis player at plus 220 when the market is at fair value plus 177. We should bet about $18 on it. And when I look at this, I see, okay, FanDuel plus 140, ESPN 150, 150, 140, 135, 220. Now, the odds that MGM is correct on this when all of these other books are wrong is very unlikely. This is a main market, and we're getting a 15% edge on this main market. Now, it is tennis, and you could maybe make the argument, and I would make the argument that tennis, even though this is a main market of tennis, it is probably a niche market in terms of our limits on the chart that I gave you. In other words, there is more of a limiting risk when betting main markets of niche sports such as tennis. So be careful of that. But if you understand the risk that betting tennis may lead to limits and you're okay with that risk, I think bet MGM at plus 220 is the clear and obvious plus EV side in this live betting scenario. The last example, example 4, is the most fun example for me because this is what's going to separate you from a novice bettor to an experienced bettor. Example 4 deals with Ty Jerome alt rebounds. Over 3.5 is sitting at plus 176 on FanDuel. Fair market value at plus 160 roughly. It's telling you to bet $9 on the bet. So if we look at this, we see that it satisfies the plus EV chart that we talked about at the beginning of this video. It definitely looks good to the market. The next closest bet is plus 150 on DraftKings. We see some 135s. We even see a 125. But does it look good to sharps? And this is the key piece that involves practice. Typically, FanDuel is the sharpest rec book on NBA props. More often than not, if you see a DraftKings versus a FanDuel, you're going to want to bet the DraftKings side. If you see an MGM versus a FanDuel, you're going to want to bet the MGM side, and so on. There are more cases of Hard Rock in these Kambi books being plus EV on NBA props than with FanDuel. So what I have learned over the course of the last 3 and 4 years is when FanDuel is showing plus EV on NBA player props and player props in general, I am always skeptical. So for this specific bet, I see 4 options. And you may be saying, 4 options? What do you mean? You either bet it or you don't. That's 2 options. There are 2 other options in addition to this, and they must be discussed. So we're going to discuss them. The first, like I mentioned, FanDuel is sharper than most rec books on NBA props. Now, what do I mean rec books? These are books that you can download on your phone. They have an app. They're available in all the states. They have commercials that air during sporting events, okay? DraftKings, MGM, etc. FanDuel, again, is sharper than most, so that raises my first flag. The second thing that I notice is that it could be armed with Bet365. You notice that 176 and minus 165 is an arbitrage opportunity, but again, because of limits, because this is such a slim arb, I would probably pass on that, but if limits didn't exist, sure, we can make a few bucks because we don't know which side actually has value. The third option I see is maybe the most important. Is the Hard Rock under 3.5 actually the plus EV side? Because when we look at this, we see that Hard Rock is actually an outlier in the other direction. 125 is the lowest number available. Now, we don't see unders offered outside of BetMGM and Bet365 at minus 200 and minus 165, but potentially Hard Rock and I guess Bet365 here could offer us some plus EV. Again, I should probably fix this. This should say Bet365 because there is a better price at minus 165 than 180, but you understand the point. When I look at this, I see a book that is typically more sharp than not. And then I see 2 books that are often not sharp, Hard Rock and Bet365, books that can be exploited, books that limit faster, books that are soft, offering an under that is an arb or nearly an arb to this sharp side. If I had to place a wager on this, my gut says that I should actually be placing Hard Rock and Bet365. I want to be clear that what ODDSVIEW is doing is not necessarily wrong here. They are finding a market outlier and showing you that in terms of EV. I'm just saying that when I see FanDuel as the outlier, it always makes me a little bit nervous. The fourth option is to look at this from a handicapping perspective and say, well, maybe I don't feel so good about betting the unders here. How can I reason my way into betting this over? If we look at the spread for tonight's game, it's an 18.5 point spread, which means the Cavs are projected to blow out the Nets. We know, or I know, that Ty Jerome is a backup. So if this actually plays out in the way that it's projected, we can assume that the backups would be getting more minutes. And if the backups are getting more minutes, Ty Jerome has more opportunities at rebounds. So if you want to look at this from a perspective of a handicapper and a plus EV bettor, you may find a way to place a $9 wager on the FanDuel side, considering that Ty Jerome may see increased minutes in this action. So what in the Ty Jerome do we do? I can't tell you. This is where you as the sports bettor have to practice. This is where you have to get used to these sort of nuances. You have to do what is comfortable to yourself and your bankroll. But my advice as we sit right here is there is no shame on passing on a plus EV bet if you're not sure about its true value. I think too many people overbet. Too many people pay for a service like ODDSVIEW and think, well, I got to get the most of it. I got to get a ton of volume. I got to bet. And they're betting into things that may not be certain. And of course, none of these bets are certain, but I think we can be certain in certain spots about the value presented. Now, what's going to happen in terms of the game, we can't control, but we can control betting efficient markets. So before we wrap up, let's do a quick review. This is the chart that I would suggest people stick to at the beginning. And if they want to change this as they progress through and get more experience, they can do so. The first question I would ask yourself if it satisfies the chart is, does it look good to the market? And is the market large enough that we can actually draw a conclusion? If we think about the CJ McCollum example, there was only 3 comps. That is not good enough to me to draw a conclusion. Does it look good to sharps? What does FanDuel say? What does Pinnacle say? How do the rec books align with this? And finally, when in doubt, pass on the bet or bet less money. The suggested bankroll allotment is a great tool, but if you're uncomfortable betting $9 on Ty Jerome's rebounds when you don't really know, knock it down to 5 or skip it entirely. I hope this video was helpful. Again, if you have any questions, please let me know down in the comments and I can attempt to answer those. Again, the most important thing for you to do is bet what you are comfortable betting. I am here to offer advice and help where I have experience, but you still may not want to follow my advice 100%, and that is totally fine. And lastly, if you do want to use ODDSVIEW, remember to use code GMG at checkout. It will save you 35% off your first month. Take care. Love you. See you next time.